Hello and welcome back to Bescheuertes Kurzes Bein. My name's Leah, and today we have a very, very special episode for everyone because I have with me a guest. Yes, a guest. You maybe know them, but in case you don't, that's the reason we're doing this whole podcast. My guest is Andy from Reverse Swept Radio, one of the more interesting cricket podcasts out there because it's not your typical cricket podcast, I would say. But how that came to be and who Andy is, that's for him to tell you. I would guess. So welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very kind words.
Well, obviously, no. As I told you in our chat on Twitter. Your podcast was very, very important to me at a very, very bad time in my life, and well, now that I've started my own podcast over the pandemic, as basically everyone did, I thought, okay, well, the least I can do is give you some airtime, introduce you to some new people, maybe. Um, yeah, and I guess we should start with who are you? What are you? How did you get into cricket and how did you get into podcasting? Because your podcast has been running a lot longer than this channel has.
Yeah, it's funny. We started the podcast. It goes back to 2010, so 14 years now. And I would love to say there was this sort of beautiful origin story. Really, I personally just got very into podcasts around that time. I think the whole thing was just sort of kicking off, and I was listening to a lot. And I found myself at a phase that I guess a lot of us maybe do, where left university, I was working and enjoying work, but missing the chance to just sort of make things a bit on
Mm.
my own way and my own terms. So I kind of like the idea of making a podcast. Um, and as I guess you found, and I'm sure lots of your listeners have found, it's obviously a very free medium. If you want to have a go, you can have a go. Cricket, I guess, felt obvious because it was a love. It has always been a love and a passion. And yeah, well, that's a sort of basic intro, but I'll stop there if you, yeah,
No,
I don't
no,
want to go on.
it's all fine. But because of course you need passion for your subject to make a good podcast, and you obviously have that passion for cricket. But I think I will just describe the podcast for people that have not yet listened to it. It's relatively unique in the landscape of cricket podcasts, I would say, because it has a relatively rigid structure. It's basically three parts. Every episode, um, there is a brief update of what's happening in the cricket world, what is happening in your lives, because you're not doing this alone. You are doing it with a friend of yours, Toby, and yeah, and then that is relatively brief, and it is followed by a section called "From the Archives," where you talk about uh, something, some maybe obscure little story from cricket's past. Sometimes it's only tangentially related to cricket. Something like talking about exporting a painting from England that was called The Cricketers, and well, stuff like that,
Pick one of my
basically.
favorites there. I loved doing that. That was one of my I had so much fun with that. So yeah,
Yeah,
you've got great taste because you picked one of my all-time favorites. So
yeah, and the third and final section is the review, which is where you review a piece of mostly of media that has cricket as a subject matter. It can be basically anything. Mostly it's books, of course, because cricket is a very literary sport, or literature. There's an affinity for literature among cricket fans. And so there's lots and lots of books written about cricket, and so that's mostly what you review. But it can also be a TV series, a movie, or at least once you did a play, actually.
Yeah.
So, and this is basically the structure of every episode of your podcast. And I'm I mean, mostly cricket podcasts are news focused, mostly, or stats focused, something like what Jared Kimber does, and what's on Gorilla Cricket, Bishop and the Bear, or stuff like that, and the Armchair Cricket podcast, where I'm also very often a guest. Those are mostly focused on news and what is happening. And how did you come up with the idea of doing a cricket podcast that is mostly focused on interesting, well, stories from the past? And because I'll say that a lot of the reviews, if they're books, are basically, well, also dealing with cricket's history mostly. How did you come up with that?
That's exactly right. So I think in the very early days, we did used to do a little bit more of what I completely agree with you is the more traditional format of a catch up on the news and analysis of recent events. We stopped doing that really for two reasons. I mean, you're right that in the roundup at the start, we sometimes do a little, but we stopped doing it for two reasons. First was just we felt it was already in the early days of podcasting quite a crowded market. We felt lots and lots of people were trying to do exactly that. And secondly, and this is spirit of honesty, I just don't think it was a particular strength of ours. You raised Gorilla Cricket, where I've been lucky enough to be part of that. It's been a few years now, but I've been part of that. You compare me to some of the people that they've had, like someone wonderful like Knuckle, who I know has moved on now, but I don't have that that technical knowledge of being able to analyze a player's technique, that sort of thing. You have to watch thousands and thousands of hours of cricket, and I think there was a recognition from me and Toby that actually let's let other people do that. They do it better than we do, let's let them do it. And I think we very early on got into the reviewing and the history because our kind of interests led us that way. And as you'd be kind enough to say, we're probably not quite unique anymore because there are so many podcasts out there, and I mean that, by the way, as a good thing. There are so many great podcasts out there. We sort of found that was where we thought we could do something interesting. And both on the reviews and on the history side, it was something we both really enjoyed and something that we felt we could do well. Whereas the more sort of punditry piece, the kind of, what's your hot take on what happened in the 2020 World Cup? We can do that, but we don't do it very well, and lots of other people do it better. And I guess once you settle in a format, as I guess you're finding yourself, you have this nice benefit of just learning and improving within that format. So we're now much better than we were, I think, about choosing good topics, about how to research those topics, how to pull a review together, this sort of thing. So I guess we've benefited a bit from that rigidity, and that we've learned within that format and sort of got better. You're right, the roundup at the start, a few years ago, we talked a lot more about recent cricket. As you've probably noticed, it increasingly just becomes, a game we went to, a conversation we overheard. It's becoming more and more tangential the longer it goes on for me.
Well, I mean, but I really enjoy that there is this part that is not so much focused on excuse me, that is not so much focused on a really clear topic, and because it helped me to connect with you as people, I think, because I was living in a I had recently moved. I was living in a very unwelcoming part of Germany back in the day, in close to Munich, in Bavaria, and it's really really hard for people from outside of Bavaria to find social contacts in Bavaria, basically. And Munich is even worse because people from Munich don't even think that other Bavarians have a right to be accepted into the community in Munich. And I'm from the western part, from the Rhineland of Germany, and so I didn't really have any friends down there, and well, it helped. I was obviously totally aware of the fact that it is a 100% parasocial relationship, but it helped me that there is some personality to all of it. Listening to some stories about matches other people played in some Sunday league or stuff like that. That's really good, because mostly podcasts are focused on people. Most podcasts are driven by the personality of their host, and it's really really good if that personality is, well, approachable or relatable in a way.
It's
Well,
really lovely to hear, because I think one thing we've always tried to get the balance right is we try and pick a personal thing. So, like in a recent episode, Toby did this really lovely thing about he played a cricket match entirely involving members of his extended family,
I
which just
remember.
blew my
Yes.
mind, because
Yes.
I would struggle to get half a cricket team out of my extended family, but it was such a lovely story, and as you say, it's very personal. And I always try and think about getting this balance right between, if you're someone who's with the podcast for a while and you know us
Mm.
and you get the background stuff, I'm always conscious that if you're a new listener giving it a go, I don't want it to come across as too self-indulgent. So I always want it to be welcoming to someone new. But just to say, I'm so grateful. It's lovely to hear your comments, because one thing it's actually made me think is there are podcasts that have similarly meant a huge amount to me. And it's really good to reach out and tell people, because, a lot of the time as presenters, you present into the ether,
Yes.
and okay, you get your listener figures, you get the odd tweet, you get whatever. But actually, and I'm as guilty as this as anyone, there are some podcasts I've listened to for years and I've never reached out. I've never made that comment. And I think it's such a good thing you've done, actually, because it actually means way more to hear one nice story from a listener than it does to say, oh, we had a good week this week, we gained X number of subscribers or whatever. The personal story is way more meaningful. So yeah, thank you for reaching out, and also, as you say, you've inspired me to think it's something I should really do more of as well.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of, I think it's exactly as you say. It's the thing that you want to hear from your listeners as podcasters. This, thank you for doing this. Just a single, it means so much more than 10,000 downloads on Podbean and stuff like that. And I think that it's really, well, the only way I can express my gratitude right now to you for providing me with this podcast when I really, really, really needed it. So, yeah, and as you mentioned, Gorilla Cricket, I've actually also been on there. Yeah, as was yeah, and Nakul, I remember him. I was a listener when Nakul was still with Gorilla Cricket, and actually, it's the reason he's the reason I want a signed copy of one of the books I think you reviewed the book. It's Wizards by Anindo Dutta.
Yes.
Yes, he is now also on Gorilla Cricket. And I won his book. And as listeners of this channel know, I did an interview with Anindo as well.
Listen to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I
yes.
No, I think what they've done is remarkable. And as I said, I certainly haven't been part of it the last few years, but I think in terms of what you were saying about the ability, I guess, of podcasts to create um, community, I mean, I think what Gorilla Cricket has done is remarkable. And I
Mm,
think what you've probably had the experience being part of it, it's, it takes an awful lot of effort to keep that on the road. I
yes.
think it's one thing coming out as we come up with a podcast on a pretty eccentric schedule, to be honest. To actually come out with a service that is covering all those internationals,
Mm,
having a rota ready to go, having the
mm,
technology ready. I really take my hat off, the Bear, like Nigel Henderson, all these people, because I
mm.
think it's amazing how they've really kept going. And you know this story probably better than me, but it, it's amazing the production line of people they've also created for other parts of the cricket media.
Yeah,
People both as commentators and others, and Guerrilla Cricket's become a really amazing apprenticeship for a lot of people as well. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. But enough sugar blown up the bears behind. Um,
Yeah.
no, no, but I think that what actually drew me to your podcast is exactly this. This is something different here. Because I grew up here in Germany and we had on the radio every day there was a program called Stichtag, which is basically what you do from the archives. Um, and I used to listen to this as a kid. It is on this day 100 or X years ago, and they do it every day. And I grew up listening to that, and it's exactly I didn't listen to it for 20 years, and then I find your podcast, and I'm right back into this mindset of a kid that doesn't know what happened 100 years ago, and there's a fascinating story, very well told, and that really got me hooked. Not knowing something about cricket that I had then explained to me in a very very interesting and well engaging way. Um,
That very
yeah.
kind. I mean, the way I treat it now is I treat it like an essay or a piece of writing, and I mean that in like
Mm,
a positive way. In that I've always loved writing, and I was into writing way before I ever tried
mm,
podcasting, and particularly with from the archive section. When I research and write that, I treat it as a discipline in terms of like write this concisely, write
mm.
this in a way that's attractive, easy to understand, and I really enjoy that sort of part of it. And I think particularly there's this juggling act between a lot of the features we do. You could do an hour on them. You
Mm,
could. There's enough material. There's enough, and we generally we're quite disciplined and quite tight on our timing because our experience with those sections at least doing it in a tight way forces us to be concise. It forces us to get to the real like nub of the story. And
mm,
we're also trying to be there for the listener who it's a difficult one because I mean you'll know, and there are some brilliant podcasts that will do this stuff in that would do an hour on it. I want to be there as well for the listener who's, I don't know, on their way to work and they've got a half an hour commute and the
mm.
episode is that sort of
Yes.
so it's that balance between
Mm.
depth and concision.
Yeah. Interesting. That you mentioned this maybe perceived sweet spot for length. I know that
Mm.
a lot of people say, okay, the ideal length of such a podcast is between 30 and 40 minutes. People tend to believe that. Um, and then interestingly enough, um, there are, I don't know if you are interested in all this Ukraine business, but there's basically a person that does a PowerPoint presentation every week about it, about some aspect of it, and it takes over an hour, and people are mad in love with this. So I'm, I find it relatively interesting that this this perception exists in the podcast space that 30 to 40 minutes is ideal. What do you think? Where does that come from? Do you have any idea? Because people, I think people listen to even longer podcasts as long as there's any interest in the topic. I think.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think we've ended up in that 30 to 40 sweet spot, not through a really conscious decision around that being a sweet spot for listeners. It was mostly around what we thought got the best out of us. So we found, particularly if we let some of our books we could talk about for an hour, easily, as you say. There's so much, some brilliant writers, the kind of Gideon Hayes, Duncan Hamiltons. I could talk about them all day. We found giving ourselves that discipline of time to time made us better, I think. But I would really stress that I would not give that like as a prescription to other podcasters. I think different podcasters have totally different skills. I mean, to give you just a couple of examples, like I love, and this is, it sounds very like the German show you were describing, actually. I adore In Our Time on the BBC. And that every week does a sort of, it's either history, it's either science, it's literature. And the episodes there are generally like an hour and very in-depth and completely compelling. I also think in the cricket world, a good example is someone like Tom Ford, who does this Golden Age of Cricket podcast. He does these really detailed interviews. Now, he actually sometimes, about sort of the Golden Age of Cricket, and he sometimes splits his episodes into shorter chunks, but, often those interviews are well over an hour. And I completely agree with you. I think different formats, different presenters can absolutely work for longer. If you're someone who's looking to do this, I don't think you should be. Intimidated by that 30 to 40 minute idea or treat it as gospel. There's so many successful podcasts out there. I mean, I don't listen to what's his name, the Spotify guy, Joe Rogan. But aren't his interviews like 4 hours? Doesn't he do like 4 hour interviews? I've not listened to one, so I can't comment. But
yeah. Yeah, he tends to do that, but yeah. But I mean, to be fair to Joe Rogan, it's basically no effort for him. He just gets Alex Jones on, and then Jones' head explodes on air, and there's your 4 hour content. No. Yes, but okay. I can see the point that, or it's interesting to me that you say, okay, we can't, if we do this any longer. I don't think there's a good performance from us. That's very interesting, and I would say maybe a lucky coincidence that that what most people seem to like lengthwise is exactly what you think you are best at, time-wise.
I mean, this sounds excessive, but I have a stopwatch in front of me when we're doing it, and I absolutely would never, I would never end a conversation that's going well. That I think there's lots more, but I do find it a useful guide when I sometimes think, particularly on the review, when I sometimes think, oh, I'm taking us down a rabbit hole here that's not necessary. I do find it a useful discipline to sort of be brought back. But again, I'm always really careful to sort of say, there's no set rules on this. People find different things that work for them. I guess the wonderful thing about the medium is that freedom, isn't it? People can attempt and people can try different things out, just as we did. We tried different things, and we've now found that this is what works for us.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, for me in Germany, it's something completely different, because I am, as far as I know, the only German language cricket channel on YouTube. So I have to do basically all the stuff. I have to do the news updates. I have to do the after match reports for German listeners. I have to do basically the from the archive, the primer, for something like what's the Ashes? Why is the Ashes important? Stuff like that. So I tend to do this, a short history of the Ashes, stuff like that in German. So German people can grasp the importance of something like the Ashes, the Border Gavaskar Trophy. Why is it called the Richards Botham Trophy? And so there's a lot of inspiration for that kind of stuff with something like You're from the Archives segments. And that's probably why I love your podcast so much, because it gives me a lot of ideas how to present stuff like that to German. I'm not going to I'm not copying basically your stuff, translating it into German, and then doing an episode on it. That's not where I'm going with it.
We'd be honored if you ever wanted to. So don't worry.
Yeah, I might actually pick you up on that with proper attribution. Dear listeners, don't be alarmed. I would never steal content. I would ask if I can do a translation, and I will attribute the original authors. Of course, I will.
I think what you're doing is brilliant, because, and I sort of think you're the kind of person who the ICC should be incredibly grateful for, because the way cricket spreads is through passionate people who are willing to take their passion to others. And I think in some ways it's very easy for like Toby and I, when obviously talking about cricket in England is a very easy sell. It's like, I mean, you could have an argument, is it as easy a sell as it was 20 years ago? I'd still say it's pretty easy. But yeah, talking about cricket in Germany is, you're a pioneer, I guess. I mean, as you say, you're the only person doing it. So yeah.
Yeah, but well, I think it's an important thing, and it's also a very, as you said earlier, a very rewarding thing, because people actually seem to listen to what I have to say on cricket, and it's so interesting to hear how people got into cricket in Germany. Of course, there's a lot of expats and people that moved here from nations that play cricket, and so they are obviously still interested in cricket, and they know it from their childhood and stuff like that. But I have one of my German listeners once told me that he got into cricket because on Steam he was browsing the sports games directory, and some cricket, I think it was Cricket 23 from the Australians Big Ant Studios, was on sale for less than €1 in Germany or stuff like that. And so he said, okay, that's not a lot of money. I'm going to look into this. Bought it. Now listens to my podcast.
And I think there's something really important about seeing every way into the sport as valid. I think I love county cricket and I love everything around that. But I also think there can be this danger when you can get into like old-fashioned notions of, oh, I'm a Yorkshire fan, my granddad was a Yorkshire fan, and it's like, okay, great, you've got your heritage, you've got your thing. But for me, that's the person who finds cricket video game on Steam, for less than €1, they're all valid. Everyone has their way in. And I also often think people like yourself following the game, a country that does not have the natural historical associations from it, it's harder work, isn't it? I mean, everything's just harder. You're having to, I suppose in the era of the internet and streaming, it's easier, but to some extent, I suppose for you it's different because you do speak English, but I suppose if you're a German without
Yeah,
who's
yeah,
not comfortable speaking a language that's cricket to discuss. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, well, there's a let's get into this piece by piece. First of all, of course, it's a bit more hard work to get um, into cricket and to follow cricket in Germany. But also there are a lot of upsides actually, because of course for example on Amazon you find a lot less books about cricket on German Amazon. But what you find is way cheaper because it's you get secondhand Wistons for 2.73, $2 73 cents, something like that. I recently got the 2006 Ashes Wisdom, which is the one that contains the 2005 Ashes, for less than a euro because it was second hand and probably bought up by someone who well buys up um, library collections in bulk from people that died, and doesn't know what's this, how much is this worth. Yeah, I'd put it for $1 on eBay or on Amazon. It's okay. So there's an upside as well.
Yeah, I can see that. Um, yeah, and I guess, I mean, maybe a closer community because it's a smaller community. I mean, if you're a German cricket fan, there's though. Well, I mean, do you say this must be very hard to get a clear reading on? But would you say it's a growing game within Germany now, or is that just too impossible to put
Absolutely,
a finger on?
it's absolutely
Yeah.
growing in Germany, and I think it's interesting. But why is it growing in Germany? A lot of it has obviously to do um, with migrants from Afghanistan. The end of the Afghanistan war, people fleeing Afghanistan, um, people that come here because they helped the German army during the Afghanistan war, the interpreters and support personnel, stuff like that. And they come to Germany and they bring with them this game, their cricket. And cricket in Germany has actually been played for a very, very long time. It started in, I think, if I remember correctly, mid 19th century. Was brought here by English students. Um, then, during the Third Reich, um, former England captain C.B. Fry actually tried to convince Hitler that Germany should pick up Test cricket as a national sport. He got as far as Joachim von Ribbentrop, who was Secretary of State at that point, the famous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That guy. Um, but Hitler shot that down because he didn't think that any sport requiring protective equipment would be fit for the German people who are famously made of Kruppstahl. Um, so that was shut down, and after the war, C.B. Fry was severely censured for trying to increase the links um, or the partnership with Nazi Germany. Then in the 80s, it was basically revived at universities because people got into it, this weird game, and suddenly found out that there's something here. But that was very, very basic, a bit grassrootsy, an oddity in Germany. And since the Afghans have been coming to Germany, they and a lot of IT specialists, let's face it, from the subcontinent, they are the meat and potatoes of German cricket, obviously. But there is also, I think, there's a growing interest among Germans because they see these people play their games on matting wickets out in the parks, and people stop and look at it. And I think it's a very very good way to to integrate people that had to flee all their had to flee from their home country, had to leave everything behind, and all they can bring with them is this game, this very very English game, and integration is not a one-way street, I think. So if it brings people into a conversation, I think that is very very important. And I think this is one of the things that we have to face, because if you immigrate into a country, integration doesn't mean that you give up your identity. It means that you also add something that you brought with you to your new home. And cricket can be that thing for a lot of people fleeing from Afghanistan. And of course, very, very important in Germany now is the fact that cricket will be included in the Olympics in 2028, because that means we can get state funding for the board.
I don't know why. Camera has just.
Yeah, that means we can we can get state funding. Because there's a stupid rule in Germany that only if your sport is recognized by the IOC as an Olympic sport and is currently on the program of the Olympics, only then can you get funding from the government, from the Ministry of the Interior.
I think Germany's not alone on that, is it? Because I have to say, I originally was always a little skeptical of the idea of cricket at the Olympics, just from a really basic point, which is I always liked this idea that the Olympics was for those sports where it was the pinnacle of that sport. And I thought, oh, it's a bit greedy, cricket getting in on this, given that, cricket has so many other big things. But I think one of the things that really won me round was I heard exactly your point that so many countries where you're trying to build the game.
Yes.
If it's not the Olympics, then it's almost invisible. Your point about the role of cricket in sort of bringing people together. I mean, one thing I feel really strongly about, I don't really play at the moment, but having played, a fair bit over my life, I think there's something so valuable about being part of a team that you haven't necessarily. If you join your local club, you're not pre-selecting your teammates, and I think that's so valuable. You're being thrown together, and I think they're so wonderful about that. And one thing I often think about is I think a lot of modern life, and I don't think this is a terrible thing in lots of ways, but I think we choose, don't we? We set up groups of friends that are very tied towards specific interests, tied towards. But I think once in a while there's something amazing about turning up at a cricket club, joining a team where you're just thrown in. There may well be some people there who you would never see or meet in any other aspect of your day-to-day life, and yet cricket brings you together. And I think it's really underrated, actually, as a quality of the game.
Yes, but I mean, well, obviously you could probably say that for any kind of sport that is a team game, but I think cricket is unique in Germany in that respect, that it is something that is not really big here yet, but which is very big where a lot of people that have fled here, where it's big in their homes. So these people don't play football or stuff like that. They play cricket, and it's a real chance, because it gets people talking, and once you start talking, it humanizes you, and you start to realize that basically they're just people.
Talking is exactly right, because I agree with you, by the way, on your earlier point that teams of all sports would play a role, but the reason I think cricket stands out is exactly the talking. If you play, I don't know, a 5-side football game in the evening, You
Mm.
play the game and you go home. There's very little, interaction. The thing about cricket, even if you play a 2020,
Mm.
the nature of the fielding, the nature of the waiting to bat, you have
Yeah.
to talk, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to get to know your teammates. And and it's a rather wonderful feature of the game. I think that it's sort of it, you so often succeed or fail on your own, whether you're bowling or batting, and it makes it a terribly lonely game at times. But at the same time, you are always thrown together. You're waiting to bat, and you're chatting, and you're chatting, and you're chatting.
Mm.
Sometimes you're spending so much time with this group of people that you have not had, you have been randomly allocated to rather than anything else.
Yes. Exactly. Well, and yeah, I mean, um, and I think I am doing what I do because I want to do my bit for it. Um, I think it's really really important in cricket that you know of history and that you know of why things happened as they did. And if you're talking about cricket, you always have to talk about history. And you do that in English. You're talking a lot about history and you're doing it a lot more than you do it in other sports because cricket is, well, it's intricately linked with colonialism, with the history of colonialism, of course. And um, in German education, we get a lot of lessons about, obviously, fascism, because Germany never really had a very big empire. There's not that many colonies that Germany had. Colonialism and the the lingering um, effects of colonialism are taught much less in Germany than in the English speaking world. And so I think that you need to understand this history for you to be able to appreciate cricket, um, and especially red ball cricket. And I think cricket has given me a lot over my life, and it is only fair that I give something back. And if my bit is explaining to people in Germany why things happen as they do in cricket, and if I can enlighten them on the history a bit, then that is I'm more than willing to do that. And yeah, because we don't
I
talk
think it's
about
a huge.
yeah.
I think you're absolutely right that the history also is a huge way into the sport because people relate. They will always relate to stories,
Mm,
and the game does
exactly.
have. There is this sort of plethora of stories, and you know, I guess one of the things that you think of obviously something like the Ashes, where I mean, I think even as an English fan, I would say the whole thing probably gets blown to a level of proportion that's beyond any sort of reason. But
Yeah.
it's all that history, and what's interesting is it becomes real because the players also see it as real. The fans buy into it, but also you see what it means to the players. So yeah, it's interesting as a way as both part of the
Mm,
experience of the sport, but as a way into it as well.
yeah. Well, seeing as we are coming up on 3/4 of an hour now, not to end things here prematurely, but I think this is a this is an it's a this is a good time to maybe think of ending this interview. But before we go, first of all, absolutely listen to Andy and Toby on Reverse Swept Radio. Absolutely listen to it. I will link everything that Andy wants me to link in the down below part of this video. Read the description. There will be links to anything Andy wants to plug, your homepage, your Podbean site, everything. Yeah. Thank you very very much for taking the time to talk to me this evening. And yeah, keep doing what you do. It's a very very interesting podcast. One of the more unique ones in the cricket podcasting world, as we said. But that's the beauty of this podcasting thing, because you don't have to follow a formula. You don't have to conform to someone's expectations. You can just do your thing, and if that thing is good, people, I hope, will listen to it. And yes, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and exactly the same to you. I mean, keep doing what you're doing, and you say it's lovely to hear your attitude of saying you got so much out of the game, you'd like to give something back. I think it's, that's how sports thrive and spread. So thank you for yeah.
Well, as I've thanked Andy, I will obviously also thank all the listeners. Thank you very very much for listening to this episode of Bescheuertes kurzes Bein. And before we go, I will explain to Andy why it's called Bescheuertes kurzes Bein. Once again, it is a very very literal and technically, but only technically, correct translation of silly short leg, which I found very very funny, because it silly can be translated as bescheuert, short is kurz, and leg, it means Bein, but it doesn't make any sense, and it takes this to nonsensical name for a fielding position. It's nonsensical to begin with, I think, and it does everything it can to make the German translation even more nonsensical than the original is. It's like I don't. Do you still remember stuff like when there were complications during birth, and babies had to be pulled out basically with a giant pincer?
Yeah.
The German name for that is Zangengeburt. It's a very not good thing. It is there's complications, and it's not how it's supposed to go. And this kind of mistranslation, which technically is correct, is therefore called Zangendeutsch in German, like a pincer birth. And that's the origin.
Is that in 20 years' time, this is the name being used? Cricket is huge in Germany. I want you to have been that. I want you to have created the. I want this to be the name that everyone actually uses. You will have had the power to determine the future
I
of German
hope they don't.
Positions.
No, I hope they don't. No. Well, okay. So now everyone also knows where the name of this podcast comes from. Thank you to Andy. Thank you to the listeners. Thank you very, very much. And yeah, see you very, very shortly, everyone. Bye.